Essentially, the Chinese government and Communist Party have a long track record of wanting to influence media and information around the world. And this has intensified over the last decade or two. But one project that I worked on, a report for Freedom House, we looked at the situation in 30 countries. Now, the United States and Taiwan were the top two targets, but pretty high up there were places like the Philippines that I mentioned, Nigeria, Argentina, Kenya. So it really is a global phenomenon. Now, this is one very small sliver, like we said, these kind of what we would call disinformation campaigns, right, and content manipulation. But it really is only part of a toolbox. So you can think of it as like 5 buckets of how they try to influence the media and information sphere outside. One is propaganda. And I think that we think of, that's all the Chinese state media. A lot of times it's a little bit more obvious that it's actually a Chinese state entity, but they kind of also insert and piggyback on local media. They put their inserts, these China Watch supplements. And again, that's actually really all over the world. We counted 130 outlets in 30 countries where they were doing that type of stuff. So that's one set. Then you have this element of the disinformation.
And let me jump in actually, because this word disinformation has been kind of much abused over the last while, right? And in some cases, people use this term just to reflect just content they don't like is disinformation. What do you mean when you say disinformation?
So I think one key element is that there's a deliberate spreading of falsehoods. Like this is false content or misleading. Sometimes it's a mix. Increasingly, they're actually doing a mix of truth and false, which makes it harder to debunk. But there's that element of there's like a clear effort here to mislead. On top of that, often the tactics being used to spread this content are coordinated and inauthentic. So that's where you see these networks of fake accounts on social media, or you see people who are social media influencers, and it turns out that they're being funded or otherwise supported by the regime or some other kind of collaboration, and you start to see content appearing simultaneously in this surge across like 6 different platforms, right? So that's what we mean, especially when we talk about these disinformation campaigns, or what are called sometimes influence operations, or you'll hear CIB, coordinated inauthentic behavior on social media platforms. That's usually what I kind of really try to look at when you look at these disinformation and disinformation campaigns. There's really a coordinated and multifaceted effort here to deceive news consumers and social media users in a particular country or even in multiple countries. So I'd say you have propaganda, you have the disinformation. That's a relatively new phenomenon. The Russians have been doing it for a lot longer. China kind of got in the game around 2017. Then you have the censorship side. So propaganda and disinformation are trying to push certain content out. Censorship is where all of these different elements of the way the Chinese government has leverage, whether it's economic or bullying or violence or cyber attacks, to try to suppress content they don't like. And then you get to situations where you have companies with close ties to the Chinese Communist Party actually controlling the dissemination infrastructure. So now you're not necessarily talking about how they're trying to suppress content on some foreign-owned television station. Now you're talking about Chinese companies that are actually running the digital television networks in parts of Africa, or are in charge of an app like WeChat or TikTok or other things. So that's a different way in which manipulation can happen. And then the last, and this you see a little bit more in the global south, is actually trainings, trying to export the CCP's model of information control that they use domestically and train foreign officials on how to, quote, guide public opinion and things like that. So you really see this massive effort that actually deploys multiple parts of the party apparatus too, and the bureaucracy, and various layers of proxies often, but where the ultimate goal is basically to make the world safe for the Chinese Communist Party, disparage the enemies, make China look good, and I think increasingly, especially when we look at the sliver of the disinformation campaigns, to actively sow confusion and discord in foreign democracy.